Welcome back to the Carrot and Stick podcast, a podcast series where we look to get under the skin of all things sales, performance management and motivation to understand what makes our wonderful world of recruitment tick. Today, I'm sitting down with Ben Browning, the founder of Resonant. Ben has been in and around the industry for quite a while now, but he's really taking a liking to focusing on not just training, but specifically the process side of training within recruitment companies. Today, we have a wide chat around a number of lessons that he's learned from surveying 500 plus recruitment companies on their BD practices. We go through a little bit on his experience as a recruiter and go through, of course, some top tips and stories towards the end, including a little special guest around about the 40-minute mark as well. It's a really good episode, as they all are, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this one. So let's get straight into it with Ben Browning. Ben, thank you so much for jumping on. Really appreciate your time and taking some, it's a bit of a miserable cold day outside, but how are you this afternoon?
I'm very well, thanks, Derry. Yeah, really keen to get into it, and yeah, really looking forward to sharing a great conversation with you this afternoon.
I'm sure we shall. From our pre-chat, there's loads of really cool topics that I'm excited to get into as well. We've got a bit of a new format. You are actually the first podcast guest we've got on under a bit of a new format. We've introduced some common questions, which will spill a little bit, so it's kind of a soft intro to those questions to future guests, but I think for your insight that you've got, it'll be really, really good. But before we get into all of that, for those who don't know Ben Browning, who are you? What do you do? What's your background? Give us the 60-second intro.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I run a sales consultancy called Resonant. We focus on helping recruiters build out their sales strategy through playbooks and through some coaching and implementation work. But the reason that I do that is as a consultant and as a BD leader as well, I really struggled with consistency around both billings and around kind of having a really clear strategy to follow. And I went through lots of frustration with that. Left the industry to go and work in internal recruitment, which, obviously is a bit of a poison chalice, but was managing a PSL project there to really look at the suppliers that the organization I was working with that had on their books. And that meant I was receiving BD calls and emails from consultants every single day. I reckon I probably received over 1,000 either calls or emails from recruiters during that period. And then missing the agency environment, came back to Venn Group to do some training to build out that sales team. And since then, as I say, I've pivoted into building out this consultancy to help a wide range of recruiters really kind of overcome these challenges of confidence and consistency in the way they go about winning business.
Nice. And you've had to do all that through the COVID time as well, right? Both the boom and the bust that have followed it, no?
Yeah, 100%. And also like the really interesting effect on sales that's had in the last few years. I think that there are core parts of selling and business development that will never change, of course, but we've seen quite a lot of shift in use of channels, obviously emergence of AI, and the way that kind of buyers think about making their kind of buying decisions and their buying journey has really changed in that period too. So it's been a wild time to be running this kind of program.
Awesome. Well, we've got plenty to go through on that side as well. You did bring up a few topics you want to talk about later. Before we go into that, I do want to jump onto the normal questions that we'll go through at the start of these podcasts as well to really get your thoughts on some of these areas. And as said, they've been tweaked a little bit, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts anyway. When you're speaking to companies, and it's mainly about BD, obviously, that you're involved with, what are the metrics that you're really encouraging them to think about? Or what is it you see these guys are speaking about, saying these are the really important numbers for us that we focus on? Just curious to know.
Yeah. Look, I think a really big part of our approach and something that really kind of is key to the work that I do with business I support is all around business efficiency, right? It's about profitable growth. It's about sales efficiency. And that really comes down to two things, which is not just volume of opportunity, but volume of quality opportunity as indicated by fill rate and time to fill as well. So it's got to be like not only how many roles can we pick up or how much business can we get on, but how can we get the best quality opportunities and get those roles filled faster? I think often there's a bit of a disconnect between BD and actually metrics when we're tracking almost delivery and throughput metrics rather than sales metrics. So by that I mean lots of people will say our North Star is CV to interview ratio, right? If we look at CV to interview ratio, or we look at how much coverage you've got across your jobs with CVs. But our lens is actually from a sales metrics perspective, those things are useful indicators of a delivery kind of output, but not so much the sales perspective. What we really drill into is how many high quality clients are being sourced. So we run a real kind of client acquisition focus rather than a job pulling focus. And we then look within those clients, what are the conversion ratios that build up to that? Everything from initial outreach all the way through discovery meetings and that meeting kind of framework all the way through to closed one. So it's usually a whole lot of thinking shifts that go on when we work with businesses to help them make sure they're tracking the right sales metrics, and that then gets them focused on putting the right messages into the market too.
It's a constant question even we hear about is like, what metrics should we be focused on? We get asked it quite a lot and it's not people don't know. People have always got ideas and answers to those questions, but I think it's because one, a lot of them in a very insular world where it's like, you know your business, but you don't know what your neighbour's doing, because sometimes it's a beautiful thing about recruitment. Some people love to like share everything, and it's a very kind of like, there's people say an incestuous industry, you get people jumping around working at different companies, they know each other through various means. But in others, they don't really want to share their kind of secret formula and what it is that they think about as their approach to work, right? And so we tend to say, 3 to 5 measures is about right. And I think what you said is pretty spot on, because what we tend to encourage is you're thinking about your CVs, you're thinking about your interviews, you're thinking about your jobs being sourced and your revenue. But at the very start of that is your sales metrics, things like how many calls you're making, how many connections you're getting, length of conversation average, things like that. And what you sort of focus on there is never, this debate can never be solved between is 180 or 360 the right answer. But what you're really saying is if there's 2 slices to the pie, the first 180 and the second 180, the first one's focused on the sales metrics. The second one is where then most recruiters focus, which is that CVs to interviews ratio, right?
It's amazing to me, although I think it kind of speaks volumes. Like so many of the businesses that I speak to say that the 2 challenges, as I mentioned in the intro, is like the 2 challenges that they bring someone like me in to address, or the 2 challenges that they really want to settle in their business are consistency and their consultants' confidence, right? How do we motivate our team? And that usually is a confidence question. And secondly, how do we get consistent billings and consistent results? And actually, more than anything, consistent growth. And for me, that all comes down to that sales funnel, right? The revenue generating engine at the core of the business. And when I ask about the metrics and the numbers there's a real gap. It's like BD, as I say, the BD metrics come down to how many CVs have you got out to jobs, and I'm looking at them going, that's not what I mean by BD, right?
Yeah, no, totally. And that kind of comes on to a second question or a second topic around this as well is, I think we all found out when the market slowed down and everyone had to get back on the phones, there were a good few recruiters that had never really done BD or had done it, didn't like it, and were now very happy looking after an existing client book and making money off that and sourcing opportunities through that alone. How do you motivate people when you're saying to them, you need to pick up the phone more, you need to be prepared to be told to F off or be told no dozens of times a day? What have you seen your clients do to keep people motivated?
Yeah, 2 things. We absolutely need to reframe failure in a sales setting. We absolutely need to think about how we use the language of rejection in sales. I think that's a really, really important topic and something I'll come on to in a moment, because the other thing that is really crucial is giving people a clarity and a consistency and therefore control over their messaging. So as well as looking at the metrics that businesses track when they think about their sales outreach, one of the things that I see so commonly is when I ask a business, what is your sales story? What is your positioning? How do you communicate to your clients? How your intervention can help them drive success against their biggest metrics and the metrics that your clients are tracking. When we ask that question, the sales story is perhaps not as clear or as well understood by the consultants at the desk level as it should be. So people say to me, oh, look, they don't feel confident on the phone, or they take ages over writing emails, for example. And I get that, because the sales story is really unclear. And by sales story, I typically look at kind of 6 elements, right? What is your client's key commercial goal? What are the problems and the obstacles that stand in the way of achieving that goal? And what are the impacts of them not achieving that goal? And then so that's the external side. On the internal side, you've then got, so what is your experience of that problem? What is your solution to that problem? And what impact and measurable outcome do you have? And if you know those 6 things, then writing an email or making a sales call is, if not easier, then certainly a lot clearer. So that clarity helps.
It's really spot on as well. And I think this is where yeah, I can think of the number of times, like even from software vendors, where you get cold called, for example, and they'll go through the spiel of, what's your goal, what you focus on this year, what's the cost going to be if you don't manage to achieve that, and so on. But then kind of struggle to then properly emphasize how they can help with that or offer any kind of value. So I think, like you're saying, when you first said sales story, I was like, you're talking about like the story of the business and like their USP. You're more talking about the client story, the ones that you're trying to help out here, and how you position yourself around their world rather than trying to pull them into yours.
Yeah, 100%. And what you've spoken to there really kind of goes some way to why I'm so kind of passionate about the work that we do here. So the work that the methodologies that we teach are all focused on a solution selling approach, which doesn't mean, hey, I've got a candidate, that's the solution to a problem, I'm going to go out and sell it. It means, as you well know, right, it's about finding pain and being problem-led and being problem-oriented. So the kind of the classic approach, and so much, even today, so much of the training that is held up in the industry as being of the highest quality is based on how do you pitch your product, how do you sell your agency, how do you sell your candidate, how do you tell people, how can you most effectively tell other people you're the best. I just don't subscribe to that approach at all. And it's amazing how much
me, right?
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And it also misses the fact, which I think is really crucial to this, which I genuinely believe that recruiters have a massive amount of value to bring. And the reason that I, as a consultant and a leader, and the people that I speak to get frustrated about sales in recruitment is they're selling their product or their agency, which is like not very valuable and very easy to compare to others in the industry, but they're not selling their experiences and their lessons learned and the transformation that they've helped their clients go through in terms of the way they're hiring. They're not really articulating their true value. So they're like, we can't win the commitment we want, so we're just going to have to be louder or noisier or add more channels or add more technology. But the truth is, what they really need to get back to is basics, which is like, if a client gave you their commitment for the next 12 months, how would they end up in a better place than they are today? And when you can articulate that story, then that, I mean, you can imagine how that then starts to motivate people and give confidence, and the messaging starts sounding really authentic and impassioned and all the stuff that we want our salespeople to be or our recruiters to be.
It's a really interesting answer you gave there, to be fair, because for me, when I ask you, how to keep your team motivated, my head immediately was going to what incentives you run to get them to make more phone calls, how are you doing this? But your thing is much more about dialing it back to, it's the quality side of things, which is the way that it should be. I'm not saying quantity is the only way to go through this. It has to go hand in hand. It's much more focused on how can you make them really appreciate what they do. And I think about, one of our clients, forget which client it was now, they renamed their metric on OneUp from placements being made, which is very, very typical, to lives changed. And when I first saw it, I was like, that feels a little bit cheesy and cliche. But their whole thing was, and the big thing they kept on pushing to all of their consultants to really make it stick, was you are changing a life in doing this. Your purpose isn't to sit here and just make money. You are helping a company get the resource they need to hit their growth goals. You're helping a person find the role that is perfect for their stage of life and their career and helps them accelerate and grow. And I think, like you're saying there, the sales story and also aligning with the client and their own journey too is so valuable and powerful. I really rate it.
I'm way more into the client side story than I am the candidate side story. I've got to tell you, but I think probably because of my early years in recruitment.
Well, they're the ones you sell it to as well, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. The piece around like changing lives and changing candidates' lives, I still have a little bit of like, I don't know. I'm a cynical.
It makes you cringe a little bit.
Yeah, I'm a cynical old man at this point, right? But what I do see, but the flip side of that is, and I say this a lot in my kind of content and my outreach and my conversations with my clients, is this: I truly believe that good recruitment can be any business's competitive advantage, and that a recruiter who's got experience of knowing how to run effective hiring processes can give their clients a competitive advantage. And like, you think about all of the best known and regarded leaders of any type in the world, whether they be political leaders or business leaders or anything else, they have the power to recruit really well. And so I don't understand why more recruiters don't embrace that message. And I encourage them to do that and give them the tools and show them the process for doing that, because I think it's really important. I think as I say, recruiters are much maligned and almost like have the ability to do more to change that narrative themselves too.
Love it.
I think a really key message there is for that to go to graduate recruiters as well. That's where I see, I was speaking to someone literally before we jumped on here. I was a few minutes late because of it, actually. I was talking to an embedded talent partner about this sort of stuff and saying, the classic thing that you find with a lot of graduate recruiters when they're cold calling you is like, oh, I've got some CVs I can send over. Do you want to see them? And it's a bit like, there's no understanding there of like the context of what it is we're really after. They might ask the question, what skill are you looking for? Oh, someone that's got 2 years in React. All right, let me go have a look. I'll come back to you on that front. Whereas someone that really seeks to understand a bit deeper the business they're working with and really give life to the word consultant. So I feel that's forgotten often in recruitment is everyone wants to be called a recruitment consultant, but very few actually do the consulting part is the problem.
Yeah, right. I see that entirely. And, we label it like the only way to not be transactional is to be transformational. And that sounds a bit...
I like that as a mantra.
Well, it sounds a bit fluffy, right? And it is ultimately just about this idea, right? That I used to think I was consultative. And when I said I was consultative, the truth is I was just doing transactional recruitment with a bit of rapport and a smile.
With a few questions.
I was looking people in the eye while I was doing the transaction.
Yeah.
Right. Now when we think about this idea of transformational, we really do talk to businesses about, like I say, that question of another question I use actually is when when a recruiter's talking to their client, I advise that they say, if in 2 years' time the way you recruit is running as well as you could possibly imagine, what will have changed and how will you know? And then as a recruiter, your mission is not just to fill the jobs, but is to leave that client in 6 months' time, 12 months' time, 2 years' time, working towards or lead them towards that goal. Now, it might be something as simple as we'll hire 50% quicker than we do today, or it might be as simple as we want to reduce our hiring spend. But the last time I was on a client meeting with, I was working with a recruiter and sitting on one of their client meetings. We asked that question, and the business leader said, "Is stakeholder alignment for us the biggest problem in our hiring pipeline?" Is that we've got 3 stakeholders and none of them agree. And if we could get to a place at any point, but even if it took 2 years, we'd be delighted if we could get to a place where we genuinely felt we had stakeholder alignment. And that then meant the rest of the conversation was about, well, how can we as a recruitment agency help you do that? And that sealed the business. They've set a contract in place, right? Yeah, exactly. They've set up an agreement with that business to recruit for them for the next 6 months. That's going to be something like 50 hires. They've got those on an exclusive basis off the fact that they are not just going to focus on filling the roles, but look at how can we get these stakeholders better aligned. It might be a bit of a poison chalice. It might be a very difficult thing to do, but they've thrown their hat in the ring, and they've by helping their client understand the problem better, they've proven their ability, or at least shown their credibility in being able to solve it. There's this great quote which goes, if you can show somebody that you understand their problem better than they do, they'll tend to believe you have the solution.
And that's what being a consultant is. It's about being an expert in your area, right? Like, again, another example is I think about the number of times that I've spoken to a technical recruiter and they've come in like, I specialize in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I'm like, mate, that's like saying like a builder specializes in collecting bricks. It's like, yeah, they're the foundational parts. What frameworks do they use on top of those? What technologies are they using around that? What libraries do they wrap in? Yeah, if you're speaking to someone that's technical and they hear you say, oh yeah, I've got guys who specialize in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, they're going to look at you and just think you have no idea what you're talking about. And the trust is lost, right? And so I completely agree with you. If you don't know more about the area that you're trying to specialize in than the person you're speaking to does, they're not going to believe in you as a consultant.
Yeah, 100%. Can I just mention something? I said when you asked me that question around how do you keep a team motivated, I said that we need to look at this idea of rejection. I wonder if I can just touch on that briefly.
Of course you can. Go for it.
I
like conversations when they roll a little bit more, so I'm all down for it. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I flagged it as a point, and then we didn't. Then I did come back to it. So I feel like
I like
the audience
so much. That's why. Go on.
So one of the other things that we think about with outreach in particular, and where we experience most of this idea of rejection, is once you've got a sales story, the job of the recruiter or the consultant or the salesperson then, from my perspective, in outreach, in prospecting, is going out and testing whether that hypothesis is true. So I believe, Derry, that you've got one of these 3 challenges, and I'm going to call you and I'm going to ask you whether those 3 challenges sound familiar, and you're probably going to tell me that they don't, because we've all seen Benjamin Dennehy's live cold calls, right? Yeah. So my job here is to test, the consultant's job here is to test the hypothesis. I've got 3 potential issues you're likely to face. Which one do you face? So when you say I don't face any of them, either I think that's true, and that could well be true. It's a very plausible outcome. You might have a solution, so I might dig into that. Or you say, yeah, I do have one of them, in which case we might then look to book a meeting. Or you say, I don't want to have the conversation, leave me alone. And that might be potentially an environment where we feel like there's some rejection there. But what is that person rejecting? That person is rejecting answering the question, is almost rejecting taking your survey. Well, we've got to find a better way of framing that than thinking that conversation is in somehow, or that in somehow we've been rejected. And when I hear about people talking about resilience in recruitment, I think it's exactly the wrong way to think about it. It's almost saying that when someone says no to us, that is a bad part of the job. Like, someone saying no to us is just part of the process, right? So I'm always kind of caught in this idea of rejection and resilience. When we think about motivation, I want to look at metrics. I want to go back to the data and say, look, if you make 20 cold calls or 20 outreach, let's say 20 cold calls, for example, because the numbers work better, and you only end up in 1 positive, or no, if 20 of the conversations you have, only 1 person wants to talk to you about those problems that you've cited, that's not rejection of you. It's the fact that the hypothesis isn't working, and we need to better define exactly what our clients' needs are. So I think, as well as there being value in understanding messaging and confidence and clarity from that, there's also this fact of when you've got a clear plan, you can then tweak it and evolve it and take it forwards. And if you're just out there winging it, that's where we get this sense of rejection from, because it's like, oh, I wasn't interesting enough. And it's like, well, that's not the game, right?
Completely agree. I think back to one of the calls. So we've got a guy who works in our team, a guy called Luke, who's an account exec. He does demos, closes deals, all the rest of it. He started with us as an SDR, and when he really got into his rhythm as an SDR after about 7 weeks of learning the role and all the rest of it, there was a call that our SDR manager sent over. It was about 10 minutes long, and he was like, just listen to this. And I listened to it, and Luke probably spoke to, I wouldn't say the most resistant guy, like he wasn't fighting against someone who was telling him to F off, basically. But there was 3 times throughout that call where I could think, God, I'd have given up there, or I know another SDR would have given up there, or, I was just like, I'd have given up. But he perseveres through all these rejections and all these pushbacks that keep on coming his way. But he books the meeting in the end, and I'm just like, I do not know how on earth he's managed to do that. I was like, because it's just magic. It scares you when someone is that good and they're able to overcome rejections like that. And just, that's one more question, just one more thing before you go. And it keeps the conversation going and going and going. It's so impressive when you learn to battle through rejection without being a dick about it, obviously. Being able to battle through it, I think, is such an impressive skill in a salesperson.
Yes, a little bit of disassociation as well there, I think, is just knowing the process. And again, that for me, where I've seen that work best with agencies and consultants is where they're able to detach from the emotion of the situation and know the story. And again, that comes back to this really kind of almost impassioned idea of, look, as a recruiter, I'm calling people who I think probably have a hiring process that is suboptimal. And I suspect that most of the agencies they work with aren't talking to them about improving their hiring strategy over a period of time. So I'm going to go out, because I know that's a differentiated conversation. I know it's a problem that they face. I've got some ideas on how we solve it. And if they don't want to have the conversation, that's absolutely fine. But I'm 100% certain that that's the right conversation for us to be having. So, there's confidence in messaging, reframing failure. I think those are the things that, for me, really help motivate teams best.
And how do you think best, I mean, this could go into a whole other conversation itself, but how do you think you best build up that kind of resilience to rejection and being able to work through it? Is it through formal training? Some will probably tell you it's just through experience and getting used to it. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I think to a large extent, training and recruitment is overrated. We've got this idea.
That's the podcast clip that's going on social media.
Yeah, I mean, look, there isn't enough training across the industry. We've got, whatever it is, 40,000 agencies in the UK, whatever. There isn't enough training happening. But training is also very often seen as being the fix when you want to get your consultants doing better or you want to grow your business. I'm sure most of your audience will be familiar with, at least, and if not read, Good to Great by Jim Collins, right? Absolute seminal work on how you grow an amazing organization, really research backed, really data led. In the book, the author talks about the idea of the flywheel concept, which are things that you can do within your business that drive continual success and that will build momentum and grow the organization, really grow the organization. Unfortunately, for all its virtue, training isn't that. What training does is it helps level up your individuals, and it's great for doing that. But what so many recruiters lack is a real clarity over their sales process. And I think a lot of the things we've already discussed speak to this exact point. So we ran some data on 500 recruitment businesses, and 76% said they had no clear sales methodology, and 80% said that they had no clear process for turning a phone call into a meeting. So moving a client from a phone-based outreach to a meeting, which is absolutely incredible. And even if it's off, right, it's 500 business leaders. So it's not, even if it's not fully representative of the entire market, it's indicative of something that I see all the time with the businesses that I speak to and the consultants that I hear from as well, which is that lack of clarity in the step-by-step process. I believe that competent consultants can sell, and they will get better through repetition and experience. But what they really lack is, as I say, a clear sales message, a clear sales workflow, and clarity over what each step is for. We talk about this idea of a commitment ladder, but how are they running a sales process that matches the buyer's journey? So yeah, for that reason, I think that training is often overrated, and actually that the process is probably the thing that's going to drive growth most for businesses looking to improve their BD this year.
Well, I'm really glad you said it, because my next question was going to be around, frameworks, methodologies, or processes that you think drive a high performance culture. And you've almost kind of given there the intro spiel to that whole area of the conversation in itself. So to dig more into that, then obviously you found out this data. We know that 3 in 4 don't really have a clear process, and 4 in 5 struggle to have a process that turns a call into a meeting. What are you going in, and what is it that makes your clients one of the 20% or the 15% in this case that make a difference?
Yeah, it's been a process of refinement, absolutely. And, we've definitely had to learn the hard way. I mean, the other thing I should say is that I come to this idea of training being overrated as someone who set up my business as a training business, right? Like my role was L&D, and I've seen firsthand.
Was it a realization you had of like, wow, like I've got a training business here that I need to pivot because training isn't the answer to this problem?
Yeah, 100%. We got really good feedback, always got really good feedback on the training we delivered. The business was doing really well. What we were seeing though was 3 to 6 months after training interventions, the processes that consultants were using just went back to what they'd been doing before. They weren't able to use the skills they'd learned because they didn't have a framework for them to sit in. It's like, it's like learning a foreign language and then not speaking it for 5 years. Of course, you're not gonna. You're just not in the environment to apply it. So yeah, we really looked at that, and I'm, as I say, a massive advocate for the idea that recruiters and recruitment as an industry needs to move away from a product pitching sales approach to a kind of a solution selling methodology, and that's the kind of the work that we do, is helping organizations shift culturally from being almost a more reactive revenue generating business to being a very sales led organization with that really strong kind of understanding of having a clear sales story, testing the hypothesis, running really effective discovery meetings, and then negotiating for excessively high commitment compared to what they're used to.
So to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit and challenge on this, I guess what you're saying with the solution selling is, like we said earlier on, you then need to really be as much of an expert in this area, if not more so, than the person you're trying to sell to. If you're a technical recruiter selling to an engineering manager, they know everything there is to know about, not everything there is to know, but a lot of things about coding and development, and really the kind of people that they've seen be successful in that arena. Raising a consultant up to that standard, I think, to have that kind of I won't say intelligence, it's the wrong word, but the skill set and the understanding and the knowledge that these people carry, despite having not been trained in that field, feels like a really high bar to jump up, and it's not as simple as we just change our culture and start talking about solutions. So how do you get over that hurdle?
Yeah, and it's a what you've raised there is a really, really good key question, and something that we had to look at quite deeply. The challenge, the change that the expertise that we expect consultants to bring, and the consulting that we expect consultants to bring, is not domain knowledge about the roles that they hire for. The expertise that we look at with consultants is saying, right, as a business, what are the 10 to 15 metrics that they're most likely to track or see as being, like when you say, when I ask that question, if in 2 years' time hiring is as good as you can possibly imagine it, what will have changed and how will you know? One of those things I mentioned already is stakeholder alignment. Of course, the classic three are time to hire, cost of hire, and quality of hire. But how do you actually track quality of hire? Is it how long it takes somebody to be working independently? So if we, do you know what I mean? Is it how long somebody can make an end-to-end placement on their own? Is it how effective are they within their first 30 days? Is it how long does it take them to get to a point where they can screen 20 candidates or 10 candidates in one day? Like, what are those benchmarks for quality and where are they set? That's the sort of thing that we'd more likely expect a recruiter to be able to map out. The other things are more things like, what are the 5 different types of interview style that work best for the things your clients most commonly see? Like, recruiters are taught, I think I was anyway, and certainly lots of people I speak to are taught to kind of be a little bit dubious about panel interviews or assessments or tests or those sorts of things. But those types of processes have absolutely a really valuable place in a system when they're managed well. So I'm kind of thinking from a consultant's perspective, what do you know about how to assess a candidate? What do you know about how to present an employer brand effectively? How well do you know your candidate pool so you understand what parts of a role apart from the salary excite them about an opportunity? And so often, of course, unfortunately, so often, recruiters don't know that bit. Like, they don't know that bit. And that's I work with, it's worth checking out, actually. I work with a guy called Jamie Rogers, and Jamie came on my podcast and was talking about some of the ways that he got to that place where he understood lots of this. And he reads lots of books on hiring and leadership. And there are some absolutely great books that Jamie's been able to pull data out of and share with his clients that they just recognize straight away, wow, Jamie understands hiring. There's lots of literature, there's lots of stuff out there. But as I say, the key to it is less about a recruiter knowing their domain knowledge for the roles that they hire and more domain knowledge of actually how to hire really well.
Yeah, I love that. And like you say, it's that domain knowledge is the big one. And what I like what you said about there is, like, it's not even strictly having to have the nth level degree understanding. It's more what metrics really matter, because any business that's kind of worth their salt will be thinking about the numbers, right? Like, success is measured by a number. It's not just something you go, yeah, we've been successful, cool, how? You always go back to a number. So by understanding those numbers and being able to have a conversation and understanding the context of those numbers, that's probably enough, which I quite like in terms of how you said it. It's good. Yeah,
look, I mean, no one out there in the world, very few organizations out there in the world of business are tracking how many minutes, like by the minutes an hour, how long it takes them on average per hire.
Yeah.
So as a consultant, you don't need to know the answer to that question. You don't even need to know the industry average. But if you say to your client, on average, how many minutes and hours does it take you to make each hire, to hire a developer? They'd be like, I don't know, I never really thought about it. Well, hang on, a minute ago you told me that hiring takes too long. So let's look at that. Let's work together to have a conversation around working out how many minutes and hours it typically does take. And now they've left the meeting thinking, oh, well, now I've got a tangible metric that I can actually think about. If then as a consultant, you can say, well, look, there are 4 things that we do in our process specifically designed to help reduce that time. I've bought from you already, right? I've decided you're the recruiter I want to help me just by the very nature that you've helped me understand and measure the problem. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and showing them value, right? This is the big thing I always come back to is, like, are you adding value first? I don't mean just chuck an ebook at someone. have you given us something to go away and think about, or something they have to consider, or maybe a blind spot they weren't aware of before? And that adds so much value because, again, it's helping them realize an area where there's risk that maybe they haven't considered before.
Yeah. Exactly right. Again, when I was on this meeting with the client of mine, and we were asking the end employer what their kind of things were, they said stakeholder alignment was a big one. And it's fascinating because you don't think that's, when you think about, when you plan all these sessions and you do all the work with the consultants, like stakeholder alignment is one I like to talk about because it is a common experience. But the global head of talent said it to us, and we were like, brilliant, that's absolutely on our roadmap. She also raised they wanted their employer brand to be better and cut through in the market better. Fantastic, something we can also talk about. And then she talked about salary clarity. Now, she said we find hiring really expensive. When we dug into that, we could have said, oh, okay, well, we'll reduce our fees. Super interesting. I'm so glad we didn't, of course. She then went on to say that in the last 12 months, on average, the salaries that they paid were 107% above the bracket that they were aiming for. Okay. So her perspective of hiring being expensive wasn't anything to do with agency fees. And
it was the individual they hire.
Yeah, I almost had to, nudge the consultant next to me to be like, just shush a minute. Let's just understand exactly what this metric is. And it was fascinating because we can then say, well, hang on, there are a couple of things, aren't there? Is that because their benchmark is too low and they should be paying more? Or is that because their reputation or their employer brand isn't working for them in the market, so therefore they have to pay more than the average? Or is it their locations? So much to unpick with that that we could have missed if she'd said hiring's expensive and we'd gone, okay, we'll do 15%, which, to be honest, I reckon I've probably done 1,000 times in my career in my early years, right?
You hear anything that hints that you might be too expensive or that they might be about to turn around and say no, and you just instantly want to drop your prices to say, no, please don't go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned earlier. The thing around, just to come back to it for a second, the piece around success for a client, having them thinking, you're probably very aware of the sales framework called MEDDIC, but it's used a lot in B2B enterprise sales. And one part of it that I really remember from that is speaking about the metrics that are part of that framework is you have M1s, M2s, and M3s. And you spoke about the time taken to hire someone earlier on. The M1 in that scenario is an outcome that you've delivered for a customer. So for an M1 for a recruiter, it could be, we have someone in seat that fits all you need in your hiring process in 2.4 weeks, something like that. The M2 is then what you agree with the client in terms of saying, what does success look like to you? We know that today it's taking you 7 weeks, for example. We can get it down to 2.7. Does that sound like a good outcome to you? And they're like, yeah, cool. Okay, 2.7 is our target. If you then validate that after you've finished the role in their place and they said, cool, it took 2.7 weeks, that then becomes your M1 for another client at another point where you can say, for another client that looked like you, we managed to fill this in 2.7 weeks. And that just keeps on rolling forward. It's almost like a self-generating case study machine in that sense of saying, these guys had this problem. It was at 7 weeks. Your guys is at 6. We said we can get it to 2.7. We got it down to 2.5. Great. Everyone was a winner in that case. And just being able to, like you say, take 5 minutes to work out that timing and being able to use that as a self-referencing case study is fantastic.
Yeah. And look, it's not easy to do. It's why businesses who are very good at generating lots and lots of money bring someone like me in to help them navigate it, right? It's not an easy thing to do to go through all of that process and get clarity over it and put it all together. But where it leads is that consultants are then able to say, you won't, if that's the way that you're measuring success, there's no way that I can show you what we can do over the course of one vacancy. Just can't do it. Doesn't make sense. You're tracking an aggregate number, an average number over the last 12 months of hiring that you want to improve over the next 12 months. Me coming in and working on one vacancy on a contingent basis is going to tell you absolutely nothing. So what they say then, and then the closing methodology that they might kind of use is they then say, look, when we typically work with a business, when we typically work with an employer in this space, they want to see at least 6 months or 3 to 5 hires worth of data to know whether they're moving in the right direction. Yeah. So what they ask us to do is partner with them for 6 months to track the data, to support them in the process, to pull out all the stops and do everything we can to help reduce time to hire over that time frame. And at the end of that 6 months, they've got a clear decision. Either we're all making good progress and we want to keep it going and keep going in the right direction, or we've reached the goal and actually they're happy and they're happy to stop, or they haven't made the progress they've hoped for, and they want to go back to doing the way they want to try something different or go back to the way things were before. But either way, that period of time or period of hires gives them enough clarity to decide what they want to do next. If we were to do that with you, would that sound like a bad idea?
Nice.
And we're just positioning
awesome little tips coming out. I love it.
Yeah. So we just, I didn't mean this to be a training session at all, but yeah. It's just that way of thinking. Like, and I think it's really important when we talk about applying a differentiated approach to sales, that people recognize this isn't just so you can pick up a vacancy in a more fancy way. It's not just, when we talk about being transformational rather than transactional, it's not just, or consultative, it's not just a transaction with a smile and a bit more rapport. It's actually walking away with multi-hire exclusive contracts or 6-month deals, or, the big juicy stuff that really starts you building and looking towards like client value, annual client value, and big things that, again, would be more sort of familiar to your world than most recruiters.
Yeah, completely. I love all that stuff as well. And it feels like what we pulled out so far during the chat has been very surrounding the sort of stuff we spoke about in terms of methodologies and frameworks and processes. And we can't, in the space of a 45-minute podcast, get through all of those. It's good to get some snippets out there. Are there any other kind of key things or like moments when you just kind of go through a certain process or a framework with a client and they just go, oh my God, like I've never even thought about that? Any kind of key ones that jump out at you?
Yeah, and you know what? There are so many. I think one of the big things actually is around email. And again, it's probably too nebulous to go into. The one that is probably the simplest and easiest thing is to talk about the upfront contracts at the start of a sales meeting. I'm sure that your guys use something similar, right? Where you tell your client, look, we've got 30 minutes set out for this meeting today. My intention for us is to leave you with total clarity as to whether the way you hire today could be made better over the next 6 months, and to talk to you about what's happening right now, to get an understanding of what's happening right now and what the right direction of travel for you is. And it's possible that through that meeting, I'll decide from whatever you say that I can't help. And if that's the case, is it okay if I let you know? And if you feel that I can't help, can I count on you to let me know so we both have clarity at the end of the hour today? And if neither of those two things happen, would it be fairer if I suggest we put some time aside to agree next step, so we've got something to look forward to if it feels like there's some positivity here? And just doing that automatically, most recruiters that go out and meet their clients will leave their clients in a state of rapport building and socializing and those sorts of things that don't invoke a decision-making environment. And the ones that do rush into probing questions and discovery questions without setting out what the objective of the meeting is. But when you do that, when you do set out the objectives, I've seen it so many times. Clients lean forward, they open their book, they pick up their pen and they're right, oh, right, you actually want me to make a decision here. You bring people, you activate people into that decision-making process. And that speaks to another kind of really key thing around the sales methodology, which is this idea of, like, my definition for sales is empowering and inspiring other people to take decisive action. It's actually a very similar definition to leadership. But to empower and inspire other people to take decisive action, you need to create an environment where they feel safe making decisions. And so that, because of that, we have to make sure that the process is really buyer-centric and all wrapped around their kind of buyer's journey,
Love it. Yeah. I love that definition as well, just kind of top and tail that part. I 100% agree with it too. So I think about all the times where I felt well sold to it's the classic expression of like, you're helping someone to buy, you're not selling to them, whatever. It is very much that. You're helping them to make a decision. And so that's a much simpler way of saying what you just said there, is that extended praise. So I love that. It's a really nice way of putting it.
We have been joined by my little boy.
Away, the little man. Hello, guy. How's it going?
Wave, Finley.
That's a wave.
He's gone shy.
Big scary man on the other side of the screen. That's what it is. Bless him.
Excellent.
So, is it getting to the end of the school day and therefore he's like, that's it now, it's time for some fun?
Absolutely. Yeah.
In case you can't tell, sometimes kids can be unpredictable, and it did take us a good 10-15 seconds to see Ben's little man out of the room and then get things back in. So consider this a little bit of a connector. Now, back to the episode.
To kind of sort of round things out then, favorite story that you've maybe seen at a client or experienced yourself over the course of your career as well? I'd just love to hear. I always love hearing stories people have as high moments during their careers, or essentially horror stories that are the low moments.
Yeah, well, actually, now you mention it, there are two stories that come to mind. There's a story I talk about all the time, which is about a consultant I worked with who had spent the day that we met. He'd booked an inquiry call with me. The day that we met was a Monday. They told me he'd spent the entire weekend mapping out his market. He'd looked at over 300 companies and gone through and mapped out the leaders in those companies. So I knew he was destined for great things. But he took our process and he went on to do $1 million in the next 12 months, which is obviously a great story. But the thing that really was fascinating for him was that his team, he'd got 3 consultants working in Europe, 2 in the UK and 2 in the US. Across all of his team, he had consistent conversion ratios from call to meeting and meeting to close one across all 8 people in 3 different markets, which is like, it's kind of spooky, but really to me always just underlines the power of process. And I can finish with a horror story maybe as well, of the time that I got thrown out of my client's meeting room. We had been through a conversation where I'd run discovery with him. I'd gone through understanding everything we've talked about: corporate goals, obstacles, impact, metrics. It's like, brilliant. I think I understand this guy really well. And I said, look, what I think you need to do genuinely is opt for our retained package. We've got a brilliant service, and what you'll get is X, Y, and Z. And these are our credentials. And I took him through our pitch deck. And as I sort of got about halfway through, as I was just picking up speed, he stopped me. He was fiddling with his pen, actually. And as he stopped me, the pen kind of spun. I don't think he threw the pen at me, but the pen flew out of his fingers across the desk at me. I think if it had been a movie at this point, he would have reached down and pressed a big red button and 2 heavies would have come in. And I was like, what has gone on there? So I didn't really know, but over the next couple of weeks, I sort of was talking to people about it and found out from someone in the industry that knew him that he'd paid a retainer before. And he had his fingers burnt. They'd got sent a short list of candidates, no good, obviously no refund on the upfront payment, and it was just a complete no-go. And I realised at that point I'd missed a really crucial step, which was I didn't ask him what he'd done before. I didn't ask him what he'd tried to solve the problem. I'd assumed that because I understood the problem really well and understood the metric, I could simply jump into solving it. And I like to think that if I'd had my time again, I would have asked him, well, what have you done before and how have you gone about it? And he'd have told me about this retainer and told me about getting his fingers burnt. And he'd have told me that actually, maybe if we did things differently, if we did it my way, he might have been willing to consider a retainer again. But
Kind of like handling rejections there, or his previous experiences, right? You weren't aware of them, and therefore it bit you a little bit.
There you go. So I always recommend to people whenever they're in that sales conversation, you've got to ask that question. What have you done? How have you tried to fix this? Also, what's working? Like, what are you doing that is having positive traction? And what have you ruled out and would never do again? So, that's a step in my process that I'll never forget based on that.
I love it. Nice. And knowing what you know with the clients that you've worked with, if you could give any tip to people listening to this podcast, generally recruitment leaders, what would that top tip be?
Yeah. I think the key one is really think about your sales story. Just really think about, like, we talk a lot in this industry about differentiation and USPs and that sort of thing. And people really, really struggle with that and stumble with that. The framework that I use is asking consultants to go through a process of 6 chronological steps from pre-hire to post-hire, including sourcing and assessment and offer and onboarding. And you've got this kind of chronological timeline. And then within that timeline, you've got all these different metrics. So time to hire, cost of hire, quality of hire, and all the subsets within that. And then we say, right, you've now got a grid. And I want to know, what do you do during the assessment phase that is going to help me improve my cost of hire? And so we're looking to fill in as best we can each one of the points in that grid. And that then gives me a set of solutions that I can then reflect to a client. And if my client says the thing that matters most to us is stakeholder alignment, I can easily pull up from that grid. Here are the 6 things that we do that affect stakeholder alignment. Here's what we do before you start hiring. Here's what we do at assessment stage. Here's what we do at offer and onboarding stage that impact your stakeholder alignment. And as a result, position myself as someone who really understands how to get better results in the results that you're looking for in your approach to hiring.
Love it. Nice tip to give as well. And then final couple before we wrap things up and get kind of where to find you, people want to find you as well. Favorite book that you've read?
Yeah, there's so many. Eat Their Lunch by Anthony Iannarino. I'd say that is the starting point for me, and everything that I've done since is built from that really eye-opening book.
Nice. And although I always hate saying the term, favorite LinkedIn influencer or person to follow for content?
Well, apart from yourself, of course, Derry.
I don't post that much. I haven't posted about a month and a half properly, except for yesterday. Right? It's been a quiet one for me.
Yeah. There you go. I always really enjoy hearing from people like Andrew McCaskill and Alex Elliott. I think they're both really important voices in the industry. And also got a shout out to John Brooks as well, whose podcast, the Value of Recruitment, is a fantastic listen, and he creates some
great for pricing stuff. I love his stuff for that.
Yeah, and often misunderstood. I think people think it's a lot simpler than it is. He's definitely worth checking out.
100% love it. And of course, your own podcast as well. If you wanted to tune in and see what you're up to over in yours, I imagine speaking about BD an awful lot, where would they find you?
Yeah, we're at Recruiting Better on YouTube and all your podcast platforms. So yeah, if you're interested in the book that I mentioned, Anthony was gracious enough to come on the show. Also, most recently interviewed Mike Weinberg as well, who's another very kind of lauded sales leader and author. So that's the kind of people that we have on the show.
Excellent. If you wanted to find yourself, I'm guessing LinkedIn's the best place.
LinkedIn, yeah, absolutely. Also, if you want to add your data to the list of people who have taken our BD assessment, as I say, it's over 500 recruitment leaders. You can do that at we'll give you the link, but it's resonant.scoreapp.com, so you can check out the kinds of questions we're asking there. And as a result of that, you get a free consultation and a free playbook guide to help join the dots on some of the stuff we've talked about today.
Fantastic. Love it. And that's been a fantastic chat. So much we covered off, and I'm sure we could be here all day talking about processes and frameworks, you name it. Maybe we'll do another episode at some point in the future, maybe even on your podcast, going through more of those.
Absolutely. Yeah, you'd be welcome on any time. Thanks, Derry.
Really appreciate it, Ben. Thank you.
Nice one. Cheers, mate.